Well, hey there, students, and welcome to presentation 1.2, and we're going to get specific. We're going to talk about China. Now, if you were in History 1181, like most of you were, you remember me talking about a character called Shi Huangdi, the first emperor, the leader of the Ming Dynasty, that incredible dynasty that lasted a brief period of time, but forcefully and brutally unified China. Well, right after Shi Huangdi went down, China actually went through a tremendously nostalgic period of peace and prosperity and technological advancement and expansion. It's called the Han Dynasty. Now, it's interesting that if you're a person who's interested in European history, you remember something similar that took place in the Roman Empire from 27 BC all the way up to 180 AD or CE. This is the time of the emperors. This is a time which is referred to as Pax Romana, Latin, Pax, peace. Well, the Chinese and historians often refer to the Han Dynasty in similar terms. It's Pax Sinica. This is a time of incredible peace and prosperity inside China, something that's going to not be matched for quite some time. Chinese history follows phases, predictable phases. A period of strong, centralized, unifying leadership, like we now have with Communist China with a strong communist government, or like they had during the Han Dynasty or the Qin Dynasty. The alternative to that is periods of disjointedness, periods when local leaders, local warlords, local provincial leaders have tremendous power and often fight with one another. And from the decline of the Han Dynasty up to about the year 1200 is one of those times where there's brief periods of unifying rule, but long stretches of provincial leaders battling one another. Right around the year 1200, something amazing happened in China. It's one of the last things that we learned about in History 1181. The country was invaded by the Mongols, and the Mongols had this ability to take a chaotic situation, which was China, and bring order to it. Now, this Yuan dynasty was very interesting because those Mongols were not Chinese. And even though they brought about a period of peace and prosperity, they were never accepted. They were outsiders. And that's going to be another important issue, that when outsiders come in and impose order on China, it can never last. All of this changed in the year 1368. 1368, baby. If you're ever on a date and someone goes, "Hey, can you tell me a significant year in world history?" you can toss out 1368. And if your date knows what happened in China in 1368, that, my fine people, is a keeper. Well, in 1368, the Ming Dynasty was created. And the Ming Dynasty was created by pushing the Mongols, pushing the Yuan dynasty out the door. This gave China its identity back. Now, the Ming were obviously obsessed with returning Chinese authority to China. Yes, sir. That's a powerful one. But they had another obsession, which was really interesting. They became obsessed with international trade. Now, this is not always the case in China. China can be exceptionally xenophobic. But in this case, the Ming were obsessed with bringing products in and shipping products out. Now, but here's something else. They wanted to control this international trade, but they have a strong commitment to it. Now, in order to understand Ming motivations, you have to understand Donald Trump. Like, what you talking about? What are you talking about, Donald Trump? Well, here's the thing. One of the key planks of Donald Trump's rise to power was his appeal to voters to bring back American prestige. It's going to be the same thing with the Ming. Now, understand something, that China had just suffered through a 1-century humiliation where the Mongols came in, this backward agrarian people came in and dominated them. So they're going to reassert themselves. bring back Chinese identity, and they're going to put themselves on the world stage. In the words of Donald Trump, we, the Ming monarchs, are going to make China great again. And once again, in order to understand what the Ming did, it's helpful to look at American history. In 1908, America had a president called Theodore Roosevelt. And Roosevelt was one of these guys who wanted to project American power. He wanted to put the world on notice that American power was here. So what he did was created this fleet of ships called the Great White Fleet, which was really impressive. Technologically advanced naval ships. And he was going to send them out on this, air quotes, goodwill journey. Now, the primary objective of this, air quotes, goodwill journey was to project American power to the world. It's supposed to show off our ships. This is going to impress future potential allies and intimidate future potential adversaries. And the Ming is going to do something almost identical. The Ming fleets are a naval exhibition that's going to take place between 1405 and 1433. Perhaps Teddy Roosevelt got the idea for the Great White Fleet from studying his Chinese history. I'm going to get into the size of the Ming fleet momentarily, but first let me emphasize that there were three primary objectives of this Ming fleet. Number one, you're going to reconnoiter the Indian Ocean. Now, reconnoiter, that's a great word, man. It means you're going to go out and scout around. If you go to a party and you don't know anybody, you send a friend out to reconnoiter the room. Find out if there's some people you know. Another important goal was to establish important commercial ties in the Indian Ocean, so China would have trading partners in the future. But the third goal, the final goal, the most important goal was to intimidate. Is to let people know that China is back in the game. Let people know in the region that China ain't to be messed with, baby. I think what was so impressive in the reading is when they start talking about the size of these expeditions, the size of these fleets, the size of these ships. These ships were the length of a football field. Now understand, and this is a long time ago. This is over 600 years ago, and that's how big these ships were. One of the fleets carried 27,000 passengers. So China was putting a lot of effort into pure show. But even though China was flexing its muscles and showing its might to the world, one thing that was really interesting is the Chinese also demonstrated tremendous awareness. The admiral in charge of this expedition, his name was Zhang He, and he was a Muslim. So when you put someone in charge of the expedition that isn't necessarily like the majority of Chinese, but like the people you're exploring, that shows tremendous awareness on their part. So this period of Chinese history is fascinating, and once again, it's projection of power and the establishment of important commercial ties.